So in the last episode, we covered the Bretonnian Knights and their knightly vows from the Knights of the Realm, the Grail Knights, and what have you. And in some of it, we touched a little bit on the Blood Knights. So that's what I want to go into on this episode, is kind of the prehistory of the vampire counts, followed by a detailed breakdown of each bloodline. And in this episode, we'll cover just the Blood Dragons and the Strigoi, and then in the next episode, we'll do the von Karsteins and the Nehekhara. So let's just jump right in on this then. To give an idea of how the vampire counts and all their bloodlines work, we have to start at the very beginning of all this. So we have to go to the very beginning before Sigmar and way down south. So even more southern than the Badlands, we have to go to the Land of the Dead, or which is Nehekhara. And that is where you've got Khemri, Xandri, Qatar, all of like the big old ancient Egypt themed total Warhammer worlds, nations. And like I was saying in my last video, pretty much every nation is modeled after something. And if you actually look at the world map of Warhammer, it looks like our world map. Where Nehekhara is would be the same kind of area as the River Nile and Egypt for us. And it's the same damn thing on their map too. So the majority of this takes place in Lamia, which is on the far right side of the Land of the Dead, right next to the Bitter Sea. With Khemri being its main capital. So the Khemri is obviously the capital to where the Tomb Kings are from, or at this point, they're the Priest Kings, because no one's undead yet, everyone's very much alive. And to give you an idea of where it starts even before that, you've got Nagash, who is the theme of like the primogen of all necromancy. He creates necromancy in Warhammer. He learns from a cadre of course Dark Elf Corsairs that were captured. He learns more magic from them and eventually creates necromancy. And you can see Imhotep from the Mummy right here, who looks, I'm not gonna lie, looks way too similar to the actual Nagash of Warhammer, just less of a dad bod. So you've got this guy who creates necromancy and is doing whatever he can to prolong his life forever. And that gets into a whole convoluted side story that I want to kind of table for now, in the hopes that the Tomb Kings of Khemri are in the next Warhammer installment, because it's got a really rich and really cool history. So I'll table that for now and we can go into it hopefully when that's launched. But one of Nagash's lieutenants or agents, Sworon, learns everything from Nagash and basically scatters to the wind after Nagash leaves the Land of the Dead. And he goes to Lamia to become one of the high priests. And here's Sworon here, clearly not in his living form. Sworon eventually becomes Zacharias the Unliving, who is the or it's the eternal living or something like that. But he actually becomes the head of the Nehekhara bloodline. It's kind of an underwhelming name too. You think about it, you're in the Warhammer world. People have these names like Grimbodil, Vlad, and like Gilles Breton, and then you have Thackeray, the vampire king on zombie dragons, and that's just got to suck in and of its own right. But still, Sworon goes to Lamia and eventually befriends the head of Lamia, the queen, who is Nehekhara. And Nehekhara's got that very traditional Cleopatra look about her. This is her obviously as a vampire and with gold-plated boobs. But still, my point remains, very Cleopatra-esque. And Sworon and Nehekhara create the elixir of life, which is basically the beginning of vampirism in the total Warhammer world, or in the Warhammer world. And with this elixir, she starts to just dole it out to her nobles like candy. They want to do shots, they're doing shots of elixir, they're going to become vampires, boom, bam, boom. And from there, she creates this whole nobility ruling class that is preying on the citizenry of Lamia, which obviously keeps them in check, as it were. But the greatest warrior of Lamia, Abhorash, who becomes the head of the blood dragon bloodline, which I want to go into a lot today, followed by the Strigoi bloodline as well, because they kind of share a very dual bloodline origin story, I guess you could say. But Abhorash here, he is the best warrior, the most biggest badass knight, warrior, king, whatever the hell, of Lamia. He kicks the most ass and does the coolest things, and people don't really test him on anything. And he doesn't want to become a vampire. Lamia eventually tricks him into drinking the elixir of life from this giant-ass goblet in the Temple of Blood. When you go into a place called the Temple of Blood, I could only hope that you would think that you would be eventually becoming a vampire. But to each their own. But he becomes very disgusted with the whole notion of vampirism and does not want to become a vampire, does not want to prey upon the citizens of Lamia. So he instills a law with the nobles, the ruling class of Lamia, saying to them, hey, we can't prey upon the citizens. We can only prey upon villains, what are they called? Convicts, people that are criminals. Because if we don't, we're going to get suspected by the rest of Nehekhara, and they're going to come in here and just kick our ass. With that being said, something like that does actually happen. And Nehekhara does come to kick Lamia's ass. And you've got this whole ruling class of Lamia, which has got your Waswaran, you've got your Neferata, you've got your Abhorash, and you've got another gentleman named Ashoran, who is basically the master of masks. He's the spy king of Lamia, and he's in charge of the intelligence for Neferata. And you've got all these badasses who eventually have to flee Lamia because the combined army of Nehekhara just is totaling the entire country. So they leave the Cursed City, as it's called. There's this really cool part in the book where it talks about Abhorash abandoning the Temple of Blood at the very last bitter end. He's just killing droves of infantry. But they all scatter to the seven corners of the earth, all to the winds and whatnot. And Ashoran actually creates an empire for himself, or for vampiredom, or whatever you'd want to call them, in the very southern portion of the Badlands, called Morgheim, or Morkane, eventually is what it becomes. And that's the capital of the Strigoi, not Strigoi, it's Strigoi, empire. And that's kind of where the Strigoi bloodline name comes from, is this empire. But Ashoran becomes the kind of warrior king of this land. And he creates more or less a Lamia version 2.0, where Abhorash comes, because Ashoran and Abhorash have a long history together, whereas Abhorash is this martial badass that can just slay everything in sight. Ashoran is this huge hulk of a man who is now also a vampire, but still he's this tall, brooding beast. And Neferata comes to join the party, and Waswaran's there as well. So pretty much everyone from Lamia that meant anything is at Morkane. Well, vampires being the kind of petty people that they are, there's an infighting thing that goes on, and Neferata eventually influences a giant orc wog to sweep through Morkane. And that completely ruins the entire empire, knocks everything out, and Ashoran is incensed, and this grand fit of rage kills the war boss and remains in Morkane, in the ruins. And from there, he goes from being just a normal vampire that looks like a man to eventually the Ghoul King, as you can see here. The Strigoi Ghoul King was Ashoran. And he does this because he starts eating the dead to sustain himself, and doing this and doing this and doing this and staying in the ruins. And eventually he just becomes this twisted, very, very mutated version of himself. And that's kind of where the Strigoi bloodline stays and goes for the most part. Every so often he comes out from there and attacks and converts an elector count here and there, but for the most part the Strigoi story kind of ends there. And in the tabletop, the Strigoi king is typically Ghoul King is typically around a bunch of ghouls, so when you see the two together, they're kind of synonymous. But Abhorash, on the other hand, he goes out from this point with his followers. He's got a small group of 4 or 5 of his personal fellow badasses. And he goes to hone his martial prowess. And that's really kind of the crux of the Blood Dragons, is that martial prowess, is how can I become the best and strongest warrior in the land. Think of them kind of as vampire samurai almost, because they only drink the blood of worthy opponents, and when they do that, they convert them and can make another blood dragon. And where they really get their name from is after this whole fall of Morcane. Abhorresh goes to this mountaintop after years of traveling the land and killing and honing his martial prowess and converting people. He goes to the top of this mountain, and there is a giant red dragon, and he tells his followers, "Hey, you guys wait here. I got a bone to pick with Smog up top." And that's kind of where this comes from. There's this beautiful kind of like flowery sentence or two that talks about how Abhorresh fights the entire night with this dragon, but eventually wins, draws all the blood from the dragon, and throws its body over the mountaintop. And when he does that, he actually cures his vampirism in a way. He no longer needs the blood of humans, and he's essentially got what he wanted the most. He's gotten his immortality, he's gotten the strength of being a vampire, but he no longer craves the blood of people. And he kind of sends the rest of his followers out and says, "Hey, you go out, you hone your prowess, you do whatever you can to cure your vampirism too, and you come back to me. When you come back to me, we'll see about some things once you come back." It doesn't really go into what happened from that point on, but we can go into the age of Shitmar, but I'm not going to do that to myself more than anyone else. But the Blood Dragons and the Blood Knights are not one and the same. You've got the unit Blood Knights, which are great and awesome, but they are Blood Dragons, but not all Blood Dragons are Blood Knights. Blood Knights were an order from the Blood Keep that were converted by a Blood Dragon, and thus you've got the famous unit in Total War Warhammer, the Blood Knights, and in the tabletop of the same thing. They got rid of the Bloodlines in the tabletop and made them just the von Karsteins, and they made the Blood Knights an actual unit now instead. But when you see Blood Knights, you should think Blood Dragons. When you see Blood Dragons, maybe a Blood Knight. Who knows? Who knows who wants to do that? But that covers the Blood Dragon and Strigoi Bloodlines. In the next episode, we'll be going over the Nehekhara and the von Karsteins, because the von Karsteins have a huge, rich history, mainly going into the wars with the Empire and what they did to both instigate those wars and what their goals were. The Nehekhara don't really have a great history because they are purposely very cryptic and very mysterious, but we'll touch on them and the Lamian vampires as well, which the latter two bloodlines I've mentioned don't really have as big of a history as the von Karsteins. But thanks for joining us today, and please subscribe below if you want to hear more lovely Lorehammer. There's plenty to go through. Thanks, and have a good one.